It was the night before her wedding, and Zuri couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She stood by the window, staring out at the city lights, her heart racing with uncertainty. Tomorrow she would marry Baasir, the man her adoptive family had chosen for her, a man with a humble background and a mysterious air. She was supposed to be excited, but the closer the day came, the more she questioned everything she thought she knew. Her mind kept racing back to the moment when her parents first introduced her to him. Baasir was nothing like the men they had hoped she would marry, wealthy, powerful, and well-connected. Instead, he was quiet, reserved, and appeared to be struggling to make ends meet. But there was something about him that tugged at her, a strange pull that both intrigued and terrified her. Was it just the pressure from her family that made her doubt her own instincts? Or was there something about Baasir that no one was telling her? As Zuri stood there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her, she couldn't escape the nagging thought. Was she making a mistake? Could a poor man, a man she barely knew, truly be the one to unlock the future she had dreamed of? Or was she about to uncover a shocking secret that would change everything? Her story, a tale of sacrifice, love, and deceit, was about to begin, and the truth would be more shocking than she could have ever imagined. Zuri had always known that she wasn't like everyone else. Adopted into a wealthy family at the age of 5, she grew up in a life of privilege, surrounded by luxury and care. Her adoptive parents, successful in their business ventures, had always been kind to her, but deep down, Zuri always felt like an outsider. Though she loved them and appreciated everything they had done for her, a part of her couldn't help but wonder who she truly was, where she really belonged. The feeling of being different never left her, even though she tried to push it away. She had always been the perfect daughter, the kind-hearted, intelligent, and dutiful child. But as she grew older, the expectations placed on her by her adoptive parents began to weigh heavily. They wanted her to marry well, to secure a future that would ensure the family's wealth and reputation were preserved. Zuri had always been their pride and joy, but she had also become the symbol of their ambition. Her adoptive father's recent financial troubles only made the pressure worse. His once thriving business had suffered a serious blow, and now, more than ever, Zuri felt like her family's future rested on her shoulders. It wasn't just about finding someone she loved anymore. It was about finding someone who could restore their wealth, someone who could protect their status. Zuri was beginning to feel like she was nothing more than a pawn in their game. The topic of her future was never far from the dinner table, and her adoptive parents subtly began pushing her towards marriage. They told her it was time to find a suitable match, someone who could provide the security they so desperately needed. The pressure mounted with each passing day, and Zuri, despite her discomfort, started to feel like she had no choice but to comply. After all, they had given her everything. How could she let them down? And then came Baasir. Zuri had expected to meet a man who was polished, ambitious, someone who could instantly fit into the world her family had created. But Baasir was different. From the moment they met, Zuri felt a strange sense of unease mixed with curiosity. He was not like the men her family had considered for her before. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't influential. He seemed quiet, almost shy, with a humble, reserved demeanor that didn't scream success. But there was something about him, a certain sincerity in his eyes, a depth that Zuri couldn't quite place. As their first meeting unfolded, Zuri couldn't help but notice how different he was from the men her parents had usually expected her to marry. There were no grand promises of fortune or power. There were no extravagant gestures. He was simply a man, humble, kind, and respectful. But Zuri could tell that something about him didn't quite add up. She found herself torn. The pressure from her family to marry him grew more intense, and her own feelings were clouded by the duty she felt towards them. She knew she had to do what was best for the family to secure her place in their world, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. But with each passing day, she began to notice odd things about Baasir, Small clues that hinted there was much more to his story than he let on. Whispers from family friends, subtle comments about his background. Zuri couldn't ignore the feeling that something was being hidden from her. Was Baasir truly as simple as he seemed? Or was there a shocking secret buried beneath the surface? Something that could change everything for her. Zuri had no answers yet, but one thing was certain. Her life was about to take a turn she never expected, and the truth would be more devastating than she could have ever imagined. Zuri sat quietly in the corner of the small living room, staring at the walls of their modest home. The house was simple, with bare walls, a few mismatched pieces of furniture, and the smell of freshly cooked meals wafting in from the kitchen. It was a far cry from the luxurious mansion she had left behind, with its grand marble floors, expensive artwork, and elegant decor. Her new life with Baasir was nothing like what she had imagined. She had expected something different. Perhaps not the opulence of her adoptive family's home, but at least a sense of warmth and stability. Instead, she felt like a stranger in her own home. The difference between her former life and her new one was jarring. She had grown accustomed to walking through grand hallways, surrounded by the finest things money could buy. Now she found herself in a small, modest space where every penny seemed to be stretched just to make ends meet. She didn't want to appear ungrateful, but a part of her longed for the comfort and luxury she had grown up with. Baasir's home was cozy, yes, but it was also a stark reminder that the life she had known was now a distant memory. Every day felt like a reminder that she had chosen duty over desire, and she couldn't escape the uncomfortable feeling that she was somehow failing to fit in. Baasir was kind to her, always gentle, always considerate, but there was an emotional distance between them that she couldn't ignore. They had only been married for a few weeks, but already she could feel the space between them growing wider. They talked, of course, but the conversations always felt like they were skimming the surface. There was no deep connection, no shared laughter, no moments of intimacy beyond the physical. It was like she was living with a stranger, and the more time passed, the lonelier she became. She spent her days trying to adjust to her new life, doing household chores, cooking meals, and doing everything she could to make Baasir's life easier. But it was hard. It was hard to shake the feeling that something was missing. And in the quiet moments, when she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder if this would always be her life now. Lonely and detached, a woman living in the shadows of a life she hadn't chosen. As much as she wanted to believe that she had made the right choice, Zuri couldn't ignore the doubts creeping into her mind. She had married Baasir because she felt it was her duty, because her adoptive parents had pressured her into it. But now she wasn't sure if she had made the right decision. What if this life wasn't enough? What if she had married a man who was hiding something important? And what was Baasir hiding, anyway? One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Zuri couldn't help but notice the glint of something shiny on Baasir's wrist. It was a watch, a sleek, expensive-looking watch that seemed completely out of place in their humble surroundings. Zuri's eyes lingered on it for a moment before she quickly looked away, feeling uncomfortable. She hadn't seen him wear anything like that before. His usual attire consisted of simple clothes, often faded jeans and old shirts. But this watch was different. She brushed the thought aside, but the question lingered in her mind. Where had the watch come from? How could someone who was struggling financially afford something so extravagant? And why had he never mentioned it before? As the days went by, Zuri's suspicions grew. It wasn't just the watch. She began to notice other things, small, subtle clues that didn't quite add up. One afternoon, while they were having lunch together, Baasir casually mentioned a high society event that had taken place the previous weekend. Zuri was taken aback. How did he know about that? He had never shown any interest in such things before, and yet here he was, casually dropping names of people she recognized from her previous life. She tried to ask him about it, but he deflected her questions with a vague smile and a quick change of topic. That wasn't the only time. Over the course of the next few days, Zuri overheard Baasir talking on the phone late at night, his voice low and serious. He was speaking to someone she didn't recognize, someone who seemed to hold a great deal of importance. The conversation was cryptic, full of words she couldn't fully understand, but the tone was clear. There was something about it that hinted at wealth, power, and a life that Baasir had never mentioned. Zuri's heart raced as she listened from the other room. She wanted to go in, to confront him, to ask him about these strange phone calls and his sudden knowledge of high society events, but something held her back. Was she being paranoid? Was she just overthinking everything? Or was there something more to Baasir's past than he was letting on? The next day, Zuri decided to press him, to get some answers. As they sat in the living room together, she casually asked, "Baasir, who were you talking to on the phone last night? I don't think I've ever heard you talk to someone like that before." Baasir's face stiffened for a moment, but then he smiled, his usual calm demeanor returning. "Oh, it was just a business associate," he said casually. "Nothing to worry about." Zuri wasn't convinced. The way he said it, so dismissive, so nonchalant, made her wonder if he was hiding something. She pressed further, her voice soft but firm. "You've never mentioned any business associates before. Is everything all right?" Baasir's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I told you before, Zuri, my work is complicated. It's better if you don't worry about it." The conversation ended there, but the unease in Zuri's heart didn't. There was something more to Baasir's past, something he wasn't willing to share. And the more Zuri tried to get close to him, the more she realized that the man she had married was a mystery, one that was slowly unraveling, piece by piece. Zuri didn't know what to believe anymore. Her doubts were growing, and with every secret Baasir seemed to keep, the more she felt like she was living in a world of lies. What was he hiding? And how long would it be before she discovered the shocking truth? Zuri had always prided herself on being a thoughtful and patient woman, but the unease that had settled in her heart in the past few weeks had reached a breaking point. The strange phone calls, the hidden items, and the cryptic references to high society events. It was all adding up to something more. Her suspicions about Baasir were no longer fleeting thoughts. They were becoming a full-blown obsession. She could no longer ignore the growing feeling that her husband was not the man he had presented himself to be. One afternoon, when Baasir was away at work, Zuri found herself standing in front of their small bedroom closet, her mind racing. She had tried to let the matter go, tried to believe Baasir's reassurances, but something inside her refused to accept the easy answers he had given. Her fingers trembled as she carefully opened a drawer in Baasir's desk. It had been locked for weeks, but today she had the key. Her heart raced as she scanned the contents of the drawer. Old letters, receipts, and papers she had seen 1,000 times before. But one letter caught her attention. It was an envelope with no return address, sealed with wax. Zuri's fingers trembled as she opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside was a letter, dated a few years ago, and a bank statement, revealing large sums of money, far more than she had ever imagined Baasir could have. Her eyes widened as she read through the document, confirming what she had suspected. Baasir was wealthy. He wasn't the humble, struggling man he had claimed to be. The truth hit her like a punch to the stomach, and her mind raced. How could he have hidden this from her for so long? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Baasir was home, earlier than usual. Zuri's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly shoved the letter back into the drawer and tried to compose herself. She had to confront him, now, before she lost the chance. When Baasir entered the room, his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a slight tension. He could sense that something was off. "Zuri, he asked softly, his voice laced with concern. Baasir. Zuri's voice was steady, but there was a fire burning in her eyes. We need to talk. Baasir's expression faltered for a moment. Then he sighed, his shoulders slumping as if he had been expecting this confrontation. He sat down on the bed, avoiding her gaze. I know what you found, he said quietly. Zuri's heart skipped a beat. You knew I would find out. Baasir's gaze met hers, and for the first time, Zuri saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Yes, he replied. I was hoping you wouldn't, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Zuri's hands balled into fists. Why, Baasir? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you lie to me? You're not poor. You never were. Baasir's gaze dropped to the floor, and he took a deep breath before speaking. I didn't want you to know the truth. I didn't want to burden you with my past. I didn't want you to see me as just another rich man, tied to a world of corruption and expectations. Zuri's confusion deepened. Corruption? What are you talking about? Baasir looked up at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I come from a powerful family, Zuri. My father's business empire, his connections, they're all built on things I can't condone. I had to walk away from all of that. I didn't want to be part of it anymore. I chose to live a simple life, far away from all the people who expected me to follow in my father's footsteps. Zuri's heart clenched as she listened to him speak. She felt a wave of emotions crash over her, anger, betrayal, and yet strangely, a sense of sympathy. She had never imagined that Baasir's story was so complicated. You could have told me, she whispered, her voice trembling. We could have faced this together. Baasir's eyes softened. I didn't want to drag you into my world, Zuri. I didn't want you to become a part of the life I had to leave behind. The people I was born to, they're not like you. They don't care about things that matter. They only care about power, status, and money. I didn't want that for you. Zuri stood silently for a moment, processing his words. The tension between them was palpable, and Zuri felt as if she were being torn in two. Part of her wanted to scream at him for hiding the truth, for making her feel like a fool. But another part of her understood. She had always known there was more to Baasir than met the eye. She just hadn't expected this. His need for privacy, his desire to escape the weight of his family's expectations. She could see that now. But did that justify the lies? Baasir, I feel... Zuri paused, searching for the right words. I feel betrayed. But I also understand why you did it. I don't know how to feel about this. Baasir's eyes filled with regret. I never wanted to hurt you, Zuri. I thought I could protect you from this life, from the weight of my past. But I see now that I can't hide from the truth forever. Zuri nodded slowly, still processing everything he had just revealed. She didn't know where they would go from here. But one thing was clear. Things would never be the same again. The emotional turmoil that flooded Zuri's heart was overwhelming. She felt a sense of betrayal, yes, but also a deep sense of sympathy for Baasir. He had chosen a difficult path, one that had led him to a life of secrecy and isolation. But could she forgive him for hiding the truth from her for so long? As the days passed, Zuri found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions. The trust she had built with Baasir was shaken, but she also knew that his past was not as simple as she had imagined. The tension between them grew, and the emotional distance that had already been there seemed to widen. Her adoptive family, meanwhile, continued to pressure her. They demanded to know more about her marriage, about Baasir's true status. They expected her to be living a life of luxury, not struggling in a humble home with a man who had never measured up to their standards. Zuri found herself caught between the love and expectations of her adoptive family and the complicated reality of her marriage. She knew she had to make a decision soon, whether to stand by Baasir despite his secrets, or to walk away from a life she had never truly chosen. Zuri sat in her family's lavish dining room, the one place she had once felt truly at home. Now it felt like a cage. The once familiar faces of her adoptive parents stared at her with disapproval, their eyes cold and judgmental. Her father, a man whose opinion had always mattered more than she cared to admit, sat at the head of the table, his expression stern. Her mother's eyes, too, glistened with concern, but it was the kind of concern that made Zuri feel like a disappointment, a failure in their eyes. "You've lost your way, Zuri," her father began, his voice thick with authority. "This marriage, it's a mistake. You know it, and I know it. Baasir's refusal to live up to the family standard is nothing but stubborn pride. He's denying his own potential, and by doing so, he's dragging you down with him." Zuri clenched her fists under the table, trying to keep her composure. She had been dreading this moment for days, ever since she had first confronted her family about her marriage. She could already feel the weight of their expectations crushing her. But something had shifted within her over the past few weeks. Something that told her she had to fight for herself, for her own happiness, even if it meant standing alone. "I won't go back," Zuri said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. "I won't leave Baasir. I won't abandon him just because he doesn't meet your idea of what a man should be." Her father's face reddened. "You don't understand the gravity of this, Zuri. We've given you everything, provided for you in ways Baasir never could. Your future is in danger if you continue down this path. You need to come back to your roots, live the life you were meant to lead." Her mother's voice, though softer, cut through Zuri's thoughts like a blade. "We've always wanted the best for you, darling. We can't bear to see you make such a grave mistake. You deserve more than this simple life." Zuri felt her breath catch in her throat. "I deserve more than wealth and prestige. I deserve love and respect, things that Baasir has given me every single day, even when I didn't deserve it. I won't let you make this decision for me anymore. I'm not living for you or for anyone else. I'm living for myself." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Her father's eyes narrowed, but Zuri held her ground. She could feel the weight of years of expectations lifting from her shoulders, the pressure to be perfect, to adhere to the flawless image her family had created for her, slowly dissolving. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Zuri," her father warned, his voice low and dangerous. But Zuri stood tall, her posture firm. "I won't do it anymore. I won't follow your script. This is my life, and I am taking control of it. You don't get to dictate my happiness." The silence hung in the air for what felt like an eternity before her father finally spoke, his voice cold. "You'll regret this, but if this is truly your decision, we won't stop you. Just know that you're choosing a life of struggle over the security we've given you." Zuri didn't flinch. She had made her decision, and she would live with the consequences, whatever they might be. For the first time in years, she felt free. Later that night, Zuri met with Baasir in their small home. She could feel the tension in the air, a quiet anticipation that hung between them. He had been waiting for her to return from the confrontation with her family, and though he hadn't said a word, she knew he was concerned. She had seen the worry in his eyes, the same way she had seen it when they first got married. Baasir didn't ask about the details of her conversation. Instead, he reached for her hands, his expression unreadable. "What happens now, Zuri?" he asked quietly. "Do we move forward together, or do you feel that you need to go back to your family?" Zuri looked into his eyes, feeling a surge of warmth and affection. She had spent so many years trying to meet the expectations of others, her family, society, even herself. But now, looking at Baasir, she realized that none of that mattered. She had always wanted someone who saw her for who she truly was, not as an extension of her family's wealth or status. "We move forward," Zuri said firmly. "We move forward together. This is our life now, Baasir, not theirs. I'm done living according to their rules." A small, relieved smile tugged at the corner of Baasir's mouth. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, the weight of the world seeming to lift off both of their shoulders. "Then we'll build something new. a life that's truly ours. The next day, Baasir made a decision that would change everything for both of them. He sat down with Zuri and shared a plan that had been brewing in his mind for weeks. "I've kept my wealth hidden for too long," he said, his voice resolute. "I'm done living in the shadows, but this time I'm going to do it on my terms." Baasir revealed that he had been planning to step into the light, but not in the way his family or society would expect. He would use his wealth to build a life that was both independent and authentic, free from the pressures of his powerful family. It was time to create a life where he and Zuri could thrive, without anyone dictating their every move. "I've always been a part of this world, Zuri," Baasir continued, "but I've never wanted to be defined by it. It's time to redefine what wealth means, not as a symbol of status, but as a means to build a better future for us." Zuri smiled, her heart swelling with love and pride. "You've already given me more than enough, Baasir, and I'll stand by you no matter what path you choose." With that, Zuri and Baasir embarked on a new journey together, one that was filled with uncertainty but also endless possibility. They moved out of their modest home and into a new life, one where they weren't bound by the expectations of others, where love and trust were their guiding principles. As Baasir's wealth became known to the world, it wasn't with the fanfare or the lavish displays others expected. It was done with humility and purpose. They had built a life that was uniquely their own, a life that was more about the bond between them than the riches they had once hidden. The final scene of their journey was one of quiet peace. Zuri and Baasir stood together at the edge of a small garden they had cultivated, surrounded by blooming flowers and the soft glow of the setting sun. The world outside might never understand their choices, but in that moment, they didn't need to. They had each other, and that was enough. Zuri had learned that happiness wasn't something handed to you by your family or society. It was something you fought for, something you built with your own hands. And for the first time in her life, she knew who she truly was. The future was no longer a shadow she had to hide from. It was a bright, promising horizon. Together, Zuri and Baasir had found the peace they had both been searching for. Zuri sat on the porch of their new home, the cool evening breeze rustling through the trees as she watched the sun dip below the horizon. The world felt quieter here, away from the chaos and judgment of her family, the expectations that had once weighed her down. She took a deep breath, the air filling her lungs, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Beside her, Baasir sat, his presence a steady comfort. The bond between them had deepened, strengthened by the honesty they had shared and the difficult decisions they had made together. As they sat there, Zuri reflected on the journey they had taken. The lies, the revelations, the painful confrontations with her family. It had been a path filled with doubt and uncertainty, but it had also been one of growth. She had learned that her worth wasn't tied to her family's expectations or the life they had mapped out for her. It wasn't about the opulent houses or the lavish parties or the status symbols that she had once believed defined success. True wealth, she now realized, lay in the simplicity of love, the trust shared between two people, and the courage to live authentically, even when the world expected something else. The societal pressures that had shaped her upbringing, expectations to marry for status, to follow a prescribed path, had seemed suffocating at times. Her family, though well-meaning, had wanted to shape her future according to their own desires. But in doing so, they had unknowingly pushed her further away from her own desires, from what truly made her happy. Baasir, despite his own complex past, had shown her that there was another way to live, a life where honesty and integrity came before appearances, and where love was more valuable than any material wealth. Zuri had spent so many years searching for approval, for validation, only to realize that it could never come from anyone but herself. The way Baasir had embraced his truth, even when it meant facing rejection and misunderstanding, had been a lesson in bravery. He hadn't needed to prove his worth to anyone, least of all to the people who thought they knew him. And in the end, it was that courage to live authentically that had brought them closer together, making their bond stronger than any external expectation could ever have been. Now, as Zuri looked out at the peaceful landscape around them, she understood that the journey wasn't about seeking validation from others, nor was it about conforming to a mold that never fit her. It was about finding a life that felt true, one that resonated with her deepest values, with her heart. And with Baasir by her side, she knew that they would continue to build a future, one that wasn't defined by wealth or the past, but by the love they shared and the strength they had found in each other. The message was clear. Self-worth wasn't defined by wealth, status, or the approval of others. It came from within, from the ability to be honest with oneself and with the people you love. The story of Zuri and Baasir was one of discovery, of unmasking the secrets that held them back, and ultimately finding a life free from the burdens of pretense. As the night settled around them, Zuri squeezed Baasir's hand, her heart full of hope. Their journey wasn't over, it was just beginning, and whatever the future held, they would face it together, no longer bound by secrets or expectations, but by the love that had brought them this far. In the end, it was love, pure and simple, that was the true wealth, and Zuri had found it in the most unexpected place. With Baasir, she was home,